There's a little creek called Clear Creek that runs down between Blue Hill and Claytor Mountain. It's just a little trickle of a creek these days, but back in the 1940s, Clear Creek ran much wilder than it ever does now. In fact, Older Wilson says her father and his brothers would often swim in the creek after a day of clearing their fields of rocks. Rocks that now form a long, low wall all around the Wilsons' hayfield on the only land flat enough to farm for miles around. Sometimes the young men would even take their little John boat all the way to the river. The Wilson land to the south followed the waterline all the way to a footbridge that crossed the creek quite some distance away. Just after the footbridge, there was a little cabin built high up on a bluff overlooking the creek. There lived the Red Witch. One story told about the Red Witch, so called because of her flaming red hair, was one about the deer hunters. Once, many, many years ago, a couple of young men were hunting deer in the woods and had inadvertently wandered off their own property and onto that of the Red Witch. When suddenly a huge 14-point buck bounded out of the woods just ahead of them, the older of the two boys, who always claimed first firing rights because of birth order, raised his rifle and fired, killing the buck instantly. It took both boys, each holding onto an antler, to drag the deer to a clearing where they intended to hang the deer and butcher it. Just as they were about to lift the deer to attach a piece of rope they'd brought along for just such a purpose, they heard a thrashing in the brush behind them. As they turned, expecting to see perhaps another deer, there appeared a large, very angry, red-haired woman. "Red Witch, who has killed my deer? This is my land, and no one kills my deer." The two boys were stunned. The boy that shot the deer takes the blame and tries to explain that he had not realized they had crossed over onto her land. He then apologized and offered to butcher the deer and give her the meat. "I'd rather eat the flesh of my own child. The deer that live here are my children. You have killed a pet that would have eaten from your hand." Then she stretched out her arm and pointed her finger at the young man and shrieked, "You will someday know the pain of losing a child, and you will remember this day as you shall rue it. This curse is my promise to you." Then she turned and left the clearing. Stunned and frightened, the two young men left the deer carcass where it lay and literally ran back to an area they knew for certain to be on their own property. As time passed, the boys made light of the encounter, and before long they had all but forgotten the incident. The years passed quickly away. The brothers went off to war, returned, married, and had sons of their own. They took their two young sons to the woods and taught them to hunt, just as their fathers had taught them at that age. As the once young hunters grew old, their sons now went off to hunt the woods on their own. After all those years, Clear Creek had slowed to no more than a trickle, except after a good rain, and then it flowed a bit more. Still not enough to swim in, certainly not enough to put a boat into. The young cousins talked about the stories their fathers had told them about the creek and marveled that it had ever been much more than it was now. They even laughed, remembering the tale told by their fathers about the Red Witch, the old hermit of a woman that lived on land that bordered theirs, and how frightened their fathers had been that day after killing her deer. Her property line had been over this way somewhere, but they had no fear of being accosted by her after all this time. After all, she had surely been dead for many years now. They were there in the woods today to hunt as they had so many times before, and as they often did, they separated and spread out to better their chances of a kill. They each had been taught all the rules of safe hunting and gun handling, and they both wore their bright orange hunter's vests, so colourful that one could still see the other for quite some distance after parting. The younger of the two young hunters of today was the son of the younger hunter of years ago, the younger brother of the hunter that had killed the Red Witch's deer. His name was Adam, and he settled down against a large pine tree, apparently downed by a recent wind, Adam guessed, because the needles still held onto a little of their green, he noticed as he settled down amongst the broken branches. The odour of pine wafted about him in the crisp morning air. Adam could hear his cousin, Jack, as he made his way down the ravine off somewhere to his left. It was early December, and the ground was covered with leaves that crunched underfoot with every step. Eventually, the sounds of Jack's footsteps faded. and Adam turned his attention to sounds of movement coming from the woods off to his right. He quietly adjusted his weight, raised his rifle, and waited. He was just about to reposition himself when a huge buck gingerly stepped out of the woods and into the small clearing. Just as the deer turned and locked his gaze with that of the hunter, Adam fired. The bullet cracked loudly, then struck the animal with a solid thud. Still, the deer turned and bounded off into the forest. Adam leapt to his feet and raced after it in earnest pursuit. He knew the deer would not have gone more than a few steps, and he was right. But it was not the deer that Adam saw lying there in the dead, blood-spattered leaves. It was Jack. Jack, the young man that died that day, was Alder Wilson's brother. Their father was the hunter that had killed the Red Witch's deer so many years before. She and her family always believed that somehow the Red Witch had finally had her revenge on Alder's father. How else could it be explained? No sooner had Adam heard the footsteps of his cousin fade away on his left when the deer bounded out of the woods on his right. He swears it was not possible for Jack to have circled around that far in so short a time and so quietly. Yet it was Jack he had shot and killed, and so it was Jack's father that suffered the pain of losing his child, just as the Red Witch had vowed, and in the exact same spot in the woods where the Red Witch had stood when she made her curse a promise.